Welcome back to Learn Astrology with Mary. My name's Mary English. You can find me at www.maryenglish.com, maryenglish.co.uk and UK Astrologer. Hello, how are you? Now, once again, it's ridiculously hot for the UK and I'm boiling in my office, so I have got the fan on. It's not pointing directly to the microphone, so hopefully it won't show up too much in the background while you're listening. However, if it is, I apologise profusely. I'll try and remove as much of the noise as I can before I upload this episode. Now, this week we are going to cover unaspected planets. I did do an episode a while back on unaspected Mercury, which is episode 337, if you want to go back and listen to that. But we're going to cover everything today. Now, as always, there'll be something that happened recently for me or a client that's made me want to talk about whatever it is I'm talking about. And I was working with somebody recently who was talking about somebody else, and we looked at this somebody else's chart and they had an unaspected Venus. So we'll cover that today, but I thought unaspected is an interesting thing. Now, I am going to quote from 4 books today. I don't normally do that many, but I will today because it's quite a big subject and various different people have got different opinions on it. So I'm starting with the Modern Textbook of Astrology, Revised Edition by Margaret E. Hone, and that was written in whenever it was. God, Mary, don't do this. This is the 1980 version that I've got. I think it was originally printed in 1951 was the first one. Anyway, she says, unaspected planets. And she does a little asterisk in there. For further discussion, see Chapter 14, Applied Astrology, by the same author, so that's her obviously, Ellen Fowler Company Limited, 1954, Applied Astrology in Chapter 14. So I presume that book still exists. Ooh, I've just checked. Yes, it does. Now, she says, unaspected planets. Occasionally a planet is found to receive no aspects whatsoever. The student should be wary of failing to notice the semi-square and the sesquiquadrate. I'm not going to give time to that one, but anyway. This does not seem to have been the object of much research, where it probably wasn't back then. The idea is expressed here that such a planet will not be weak or ineffective unless otherwise so adjudged, but failing the interchanges with other planets, its principles, and especially its drive or urge when considered as an instinct or a force in the unconscious self, will not be properly integrated into the wholeness of the person. If a forceful planet, it will lack ways of using its drive. If a more receptive planet, it will at times be as if left out of the scheme altogether. For instance, a person with an unaspect Mercury will have moments of acting from sheer emotion without the inclusion of any reasoning whatsoever. She goes on to talk a bit further about aspects between 2 or more planets, but not aspected by any others. But we're not covering that today. We're just going to do unaspected planets. So that's Margaret's version of it, which the book was originally written in 1951. So not much research. Ho, but things have changed since then. So just to put that into plain English, an unaspected planet is a planet in your chart that doesn't have or isn't chatting to any other planet in your chart. And it does happen. It doesn't happen all the time because Mercury nearly always will aspect the Sun because it transits very close very close to the Sun, and it's never more than a sign or 2 away. Is that right? Yes. Yes, because the Mercury can either ever be in your own sign or the signs adjacent to your Sun sign. And again, Venus is never too far away from the sun sign, but it is definitely possible to have an unaspected planet, and I have seen it more than once, which is why we're talking about it today, and you're going to have one in your chart. I bet you've got an unaspected planet. Now, next up, I'm going to quote from The Only Way to Learn Astrology, Volume 2 by Marion March and Joan McEvers. And this is the book that's called Math and Interpretation Techniques. It's the one that's, if you want to fry your brain, please read that one. Because it's the maths. And luckily, you don't have to do that anymore because all the computer programs will do it all for us. Hurrah. So they say, the unaspected planet. A totally unaspected planet is nearly impossible to find. However, a planet lacking what we call major aspects to it, conjunctions, oppositions, squares, inconjuncts, trines or sextiles, does exist, and when it does, the pattern generated is most interesting. Do not conclude that such a planet is weak because it does not integrate with the rest of the chart. To the contrary, it works doubly hard as if to compensate for the fact that it stands alone. This solo performance can sometimes be exhausting, but it is never dull. A great deal depends upon which of the planets is unaspected, the sign it is in, and the house it occupies. Now, if you know all your rulerships, you'll know that certain planets are happier in certain signs. So at the moment, we're August in the UK, and I don't know when you're listening to this, but the sun is in the sign of Leo. So the sun is happy. Yay! The sun goes extra, extra happy when it goes through the sign of Leo. Like the moon, super, super happy when it goes through the sign of Cancer. And so Mercury is happy when it's in Gemini or Virgo, and Venus is happy when it's in Taurus or Libra, and Mars is happy when it's in Aries, and back in the day when it was in Scorpio. Jupiter is happy when it's in Sagittarius, back in the day Pisces. I think people like to say Saturn's happy in the sign of Capricorn, or in the old rulers Aquarius. Uranus is happy in the sign of Aquarius. That's the only sign it'll be happy in. And Neptune's happy in the sign of Pisces. That's right. And then Pluto's happy in the sign of Scorpio. So certain planets are happier in certain signs because there's rulerships to that. And equally, a planet will be happy in a certain house. So the sun in the sign of Leo in the 5th house is rah, 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 happy bunny. Moon in Cancer in the 4th, and so on. So you need to know your rulerships and whatever, but do take that into account because that'll modify slightly the expression that this unaspected planet will have. Now, Marion and Joan go through every single planet and its unaspectedness, which I will return to in a minute because I'm just giving you their reasoning. You know, what do they think about the planets being unaspected? So I'm going to go through all of them. So if you want to know about unaspected Pluto, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait a bit. But I'm going to just read to you the 2 other books that I've got, and then we'll go back to Marion's blurb, Marion and Joan's blurb in a second. Now, Marion and Joan's book was written in 1981. In the next example, I'm reading from a book that was published in 1994, and this is The House Connection, How to Read the Houses in an Astrological Chart, by the wonderful Karen Hamaker-Zondag. Now, I was super happy to see that she's going to be a speaker at the Astrological conference, which comes up at the end of this month. So if you haven't got your tickets, rush over to the astrologicalassociation.com website and buy your tickets, because she is giving a talk. But anyway, I'm quoting from her book, and what does she say about unaspected planets? Now, she says, just like any other planet, and she's talking about house rulers, so we'll modify this slightly. In my book on the analysis of the aspects and personality, I devote a chapter to the question of how unaspected planets work. In principle, we can apply the same guidelines to house rulers. unaspected planets are liable to express themselves in an all or nothing kind of way. And then she says the same is true of house rulers. So let us quickly remind ourselves what being unaspected signifies. We say that a planet is unaspected when it makes no major aspect with any planet. The major aspects are the conjunction, sextile, square, trine and opposition. The inconjunct is being increasingly accepted as major, but is not part of the traditional set of aspects. What we must ask ourselves, therefore, is whether or not a planet with no other aspects than one or more inconjuncts should be treated as unaspected. An unaspected planet usually creates tensions and uncertainty, as we shall see, and interestingly enough, an inconjunct also gives uncertainty and latent tension. So it's very difficult to tell if a planet with no aspects but inconjuncts is behaving as if it were unaspected or not. I will say this, however, my own experience suggests that the inconjunct is a major aspect. I've got zillions of them because I've got 2 yods in my chart, and it was Karen that wrote a fabulous book about yods. Oh, loved it. Still got a copy. You're not getting me to release that copy or sell it or give it away or anything. I shall continue. Sorry. Let me just clear my throat. My opinion is based mainly on the various cases where I have seen an inconjunct produce stability after a crisis. Brackets, it can always become a steadying influence. Close brackets. Through planets carrying only the inconjunct aspect, the natives have, on average, become more sensible and mature, often at an earlier age than one would see with completely unaspected planets. Yes, okay, so if all you've got is an inconjunct, right. With unaspected planets, the tendency is to bring the factors that they represent well to the fore, but in an unpredictable manner and generally, as I've already said, in an all or nothing way. And then she talks about house rulers, which we'll ignore because we're not doing that at the moment. Sometimes unaspected planets can have a very powerful effect, and then at other times they do absolutely nothing. But usually unbridled action predominates. It's as if we're constantly trying to obtain something substantial from the house with an unaspected ruler without knowing what we are doing or how to tackle this strange and seemingly alien area of our lives. Blah, 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 blah. She's doing more about rulers. The native experiences the contents of an unaspected planet as difficult, and the same is true of a house with an unaspected ruler. Aspects are one of the main means for integrating psychic factors in the psyche, and the same is true of other sorts of psychic needs and desire patterns. However, the ascendant and midheaven do not represent dynamic needs, so aspects of planets to the ascendant embassy, no matter how major they may be, do not prevent a planet or house ruler from being unaspected. Nevertheless, the link with an exit point gives the opportunity of experiencing reactions of the outside world to the factor more quickly. And then she goes on about rulers. So unfortunately, because this chapter that I'm quoting from is about house rulers and the unaspected house rulers, but the point she's making there is that they're either very powerful or not at all, and so there's a sort of an extremity with them. They're not fluffy things, I think would be a way of summarising it. So that's Karen's view on it. And then my third example is a book I have quoted before, and it's probably in the Unaspected Mercury episode. And this is a lovely book by a lady called Janice Huntley, and it's called Astrological Voids, Exploring the Missing Components in the Birth Chart. So this is like Marion says Margaret says back in the 1950s, nobody's written much about it. Well, we get to the year 1998, and this lovely lady has devoted a whole flipping book to it, empty houses, etc. So we're on chapter 3 now, Unaspected Planets. Over the last decade, I've come to the conclusion that far from being inconsequential, components of astrological interpretation, as some astrologers would lead us to believe, unaspected planets are extremely important and should always be analysed with care and reverence within all spheres of astrological analysis, but especially so within natal charts. So this is her definition now. What constitutes an unaspected planet? Strictly speaking, a wholly unaspected planet does not exist, for if one were to take into account all the many minor aspects which can be used in astrology, unaspected planets would become virtually extinct. It is my opinion, however, that most of the minor aspects are too insignificant to be of any value in interpretation, and although the merits of such aspects as the semi-square and quintile are worthy of closer examination, the use of too many minor aspects only serves to cloud and confuse the issue of interpretation. Now, on that point, I would absolutely agree with Janice. It's funny when people first start learning astrology, and when I used to be on the forum on astro.com, people would go and they'd create their chart and they'd stick every flipping aspects in there, and you just get this chart and it's just a fuzz. Like, where are we going to start? They've not only done every aspect possible, but they've stuck everything possible. Every star, every point, every asteroid, the whole shebang. They'd put them in their charts. And they go, oh, I've got this here and I've got this. Like, yes, darling, you've overdone it. Anyway, it'd be interesting to see where their Jupiters were. All astrologers utilise the 4 major aspects which are proven to be of significance, namely the conjunction, square, trine and opposition. Most astrologers incorporate the sextile, but many, like myself, add the remaining 2 aspects which are divisible by 30 degrees, the semi-sextile and the quincunx. These 7 aspects form the backbone of aspect interpretation, and throughout this chapter, unless mentioned otherwise, a planet is only regarded as unaspected if it does not form any one of these aspects. Some astrologers have decided to dispense with the semi-sextile and quincunx when assessing unaspected planets. This certainly raises the percentage of unaspected planets considerably, but I view the trend as somewhat hasty because I believe that both of these aspects are relevant within interpretation, the quincunx being of particular significance. Now, your quincunx is another posh name for inconjunct. Okay, so the inconjunction is 150 degrees and quincunx is the same thing, and that's what you get in a yacht. I just want to make that clear. My own chart contains no less than 5 very tightly orbed quincunxes, which appear to work on a subtle but powerful level. It is, however, worth noting any planet which forms only one minor aspect to another planet, as this becomes an almost unaspected planet, and as such is a very common occurrence. The minor aspect is heightened in its effect and should be treated more like a square or trine, but the energy flow of the planet is also strengthened and can be almost as influential as a completely unaspected planet. As with the qualities, one should disregard the angles and part of fortune along with all the other calculated mathematical points when assessing whether or not a planet is unaspected, as these points do not emit physical energies and are therefore unable to influence the unaspected planet to any great degree. Obviously, an unaspected planet situated at one of these points is likely to appear more prominent within the characteristics of the subject, but it is due to the angularity and open position of the planet rather than a mutual flow of energy between the 2 factors. The degree of orb allowable for any aspects are always debatable, but I usually adhere to the same rules which I apply to any calculated birth chart. 8 degrees for conjunction, square, trine or opposition, 4 degrees for sextile and 2 degrees for a semi-sextile or quincunx. The significance of unaspected planets. An unaspected planet represents pure, unmitigated energy within the sign and area in which it is placed. It is not hampered or challenged by difficult aspects such as squares and oppositions, nor softened or rendered more harmonious by easy aspects such as trines and sextiles. An unaspected planet cannot become part of any major planetary configuration such as a grand trine or T-square. It is invincible and stands alone in a birth chart, emanating power and glory. Its energy can be likened to that of an animal who's allowed to roam and eat freely without any human interference or aid. At times the animal might struggle for existence, but in doing so he learns how to fend for himself and is able to live his life in the manner that nature intended. A study of unaspected planets allows us to observe how the true energy of each planet manifests itself within our characters. Karmically speaking, unaspected planets are a gift from a past life, a life, brackets or many lives, in which the lessons relating to the particular planet have been learned and integrated positively into the personality. As with all karmic situations related to voids in the birth chart, however, it's very easy to abuse or relate negatively to an unaspected planet. The subject discovers that he has a surfeit of pure energy at his disposal, which, in order to fulfill his present karma, he must use wisely. But without the help of other planets, he may find it very difficult to channel the energy in a positive manner. Hence, the discrepancy between two people with the same unaspected planet, one of whom is using and controlling the energy wisely and is successful in life, while the other allows the energy to run wild and spill everywhere. Unaspected planets represent very strong karmic testing grounds and are usually associated with very old souls. They represent the last stage of the karmic journey, the unoccupied houses being the first stage. But it's very easy to slip backwards on the karmic path, and a person who abuses the wonderful gift of an unaspected planet may find that a future life will once again involve difficult aspects to that planet with more lessons to learn and obstacles to overcome. And I can't comment on that because we don't know, karma's... be careful about that. Then she talks a little bit more about unaspected planets are nearly always overtly expressed in the characteristics of a person. She tells a story about how she sort of thought somebody really must have a lot of Gemini in their chart, a very strong Mercury, and then she checks their chart out and it's like, oh, they haven't got anything in Gemini. Their Mercury's doing 0, but they're very, very Geminian and good at communicating. And then she said with her study on unaspected planets opened up a new vista interpretation. So sometimes you can have somebody that's missing something in their chart when actually the thing they're missing is the thing that they're expressing the most because they're missing it. Now I'll tell you a funny story. So I'm a member of the Astrological Association. I'm a trustee, and something happened the other day, and I was posting onto our WhatsApp group some information about something, and another member of the board said, oh, you must have a really powerful Mercury. I didn't want to go into my chart, but it's like, hello, my Mercury's retrograde in the sign of Pisces. I couldn't have the worst Mercury. It's just not happy. So Mercury's not happy in the sign of Pisces, and Mercury ain't happy when it's retrograde. So I've sort of, in a sense, overcompensated. I mean, I have got Moon and Gemini, so I do like to chat, and the two are square, Mercury and Moon. But it was just funny that when you were saying to me, oh, you must have a really powerful Mercury. I was thinking my Mercury couldn't be less powerful, but that's because it's so badly aspected. I've gone overboard with making it better, I suppose is what you could say. Now, Janice says that she went through her client charts and found that unaspected planets are not common. From my sample study group of 400 charts, there were only 65 examples with such a void, which represent an approximate 17% of the population distributed as shown in Table 5. So she's got charts with at least one aspected planet. So the Sun was 13, the Moon was 7, Mercury was 10, Venus was 6, Mars was 5, Jupiter was 7, Saturn was 5, Uranus was 4, Neptune was 5, and Pluto was 3. So these are just, she said, the low percentage achieved by the 3 outer planets is generally explainable by their slow-moving cycles and the long-standing aspects which they formed with each other during the century that she wrote the book. For instance, the sextile between Pluto and Neptune, which began in the early 1940s, will, apart from a few breaks when used in a 4-degree orb, continue well into the 1990s. Well, we're way past the 1990s now, and we've got Uranus in an early degree to Gemini, we've got Pluto in an early degree to Aquarius, and we've got Neptune early degrees to Aries. They are all aspecting each other. So anybody born now is going to have their outer planets aspecting. So now I'm not going to read each one an aspect of this and aspect from her book, because her book is a more recent publication. I am going to quote from Marion and Jones' book, and the book was copyrighted in 1977, which is 48 years ago. And as far as copyright goes, it's 50 years, or it might even be 70 years after the death of the person that wrote the book. So I'm only going to read little diddly bits out of it, because obviously you're going to go and buy the book, but this is just so we can be going through what each unaspected planet means. So I'll just give you a few lines for each one. So the Sun, representing your individuality, inner self, the heart of the chart, without aspects to other planets, will manifest in several ways, all of them very important, because this is the inner you we're talking about. If you stand by yourself alone, and whatever you do is done without encumbrance or worry about others, even the other parts of yourself, such as your thinking, feeling, ambitions, partners, family, then you can be different. Within you can be whatever the Sun wishes to be. You may work hard at it, but it will be relatively easy, because nothing and nobody can stop you. So I think that's quite a nice summary of an unaspected Sun. So the Sun will continue to shine in the chart. Now, years ago, I went and did a home reading for a lady who was a sun sign Taurus. And so this is quite early in my astrological career, and I still make home visits for people. But this particular lady lived in a sort of like a commune local to where I am, and she was a sun sign Taurus. And there was this thing when we were talking, and the Sun in Taurus wants to feel safe and stable and have a roof over their head and to have meals on time and to be financially secure. Security is very, very important for a Taurus. And this lady, by living in a commune, she was living in an environment which was the absolute opposite of that, because there had to be a lot of sort of sharing with others, and there were lots and lots of comings and goings. Now, any fixed sign doesn't like change, and this lady wasn't going to move from where she was. And for the life of me, I don't know if she's still living in this particular commune, but the commune itself had sort of altered over the years, and that was the reason that she wanted the reading, and also because she wasn't getting along with her husband very well either. She felt like she was doing everything, and that unaspected Sun so much wanted to feel safe, secure, settled, and it wasn't. It was a major stress for her at that moment in time. So having an unaspected Sun, if everything's going fine and you're in the driving seat and you're doing your own thing, then you're going to be a happy bunny. But when things start to sort of go against you, it can sort of feel like the whole universe is against what you're up to. And this was the place that she got to. So the Sun is who we are, obviously depending on which house your Sun signs in. And it's going to be more tricky when you hit a hard patch to be able to find a method of sort of inner self-reflection, because there's no conversation going on in your chart between that planet and any other. Now, the two chart examples I've got today, both of them are sun signs that are either very slightly aspected, so one is just a smidgen of an aspect, and the other one is most definitely unaspected. So I won't talk about their charts yet because I want to get through all the other planets as well, but I'm going to come back to them, so make sure you listen on. So let's go to the moon. The moon shows your emotions, feelings, needs, habits and instincts. When unaspected, if the rest of the chart confirms this, it can lead to tremendous worldly achievement. Nothing stands in our way as much as our emotions. They prevent us from thinking clearly, from showing our love and affection for fear of being rejected, and from pursuing our goals for fear of hurting others or failing, and many more things. Of course, by not becoming emotionally involved, we may miss out on the most important aspect of life, namely truly relating to another human being. However, all practical areas of life will be much easier to fulfill without emotional trauma or hang-ups. Louis Pasteur, the great French scientist, had an unaspected Gemini moon in the 8th house. In his case, the rest of his chart confirms the drive for concrete achievements and the ability to succeed, since he had a 6th planet stellium in Capricorn in the 3rd house. Now, I will share his chart on the podcast show notes, and you can get to them by going to this address, astromary, one word, .libsyn, libsyn.com. Or you can go to Astrodatabank and you can find his chart, but I am sharing it. So he was a Libra ascendant, ruled by Venus located in the 3rd house. He has a stellium of 6 planets in his 3rd house, so he's a super communicator. Now there will be numbers of indigos that are born with a very similar. If you're a Capricorn, you might have a chart almost identical to his, because he was born during the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the sign of Capricorn, which again repeated itself in the 1990s. He was actually born on the 27th of December 1822, and it's a 170-year cycle for that. And he definitely has a totally flipping unaspected moon in Gemini. Is not talking to anything in his chart. There's some weird, terribly insignificant aspect to Mars and another weird one to Saturn and I don't know, something to Chiron. But he had moon in the 8th, so he's never going to let anybody know how he felt. But quite a chatty moon. Moon's chatty when it's in the sign of Gemini, but it's not going to talk out loud too much when it's hidden in the 8th. And then because he's got so much in the 3rd, that's a Gemini type of thing. But he did his pasteurization and stuff and made his discoveries and whatever and was successful. So don't assume that because you've got an unaspected planet that's the end of the line and you're never going to get anywhere or do anything. But I think and I love the way that Marion and Joan have shared his chart, because that's a wonderful example of an unaspected moon. And like they say, because your emotions aren't involved in whatever you're getting up to, and equally hidden in his 8th house, you're going to just get on and do it type of thing and not be bothered about what anybody else might say, or you're not going to worry about how they feel either. He'll be on the show notes there. And when I go on to Mercury. Now, just to remember that you can go back to episode 337 to hear more about Mercury being unaspected. But here we go. Because Mercury represents your reasoning ability, mind, intellectual urge, and avenue of expression. When Mercury stands alone, unaspected, the entire thinking process is detached from the rest of the horoscope or you. You may be a bundle of emotional misery sitting in the corner crying while your mind will be saying, well, what are you doing sitting there crying, remaining totally uninvolved in your unhappiness or self-pity? So, because Mercury can be logical, cool and collected, and they talk about it, being an unstable sign will affect it more than if it's in a stable sign. But again, the chart examples that they give about people that got an aspect in Mercury, don't fret, it's not going to affect things. Now the next one is Venus. So this is the one that came up the other week when I was working with a client. Venus, the planet of affection, values and social urges, when it lacks the ability to integrate, can go one of two ways. The person may pursue his goals and objectives without a need for love and affection, detached and self-sufficient, similar to an unaspected moon, but more obvious since the emotions are somewhat hidden, whereas affections are visible in the outer behaviour pattern. Or the person may feel a constant need to give and receive love and affection, but at the same time, regardless of how much is given or received, he still feels unloved, unwanted, and alone. Mars symbolises energy, drive, action, and initiative. When these attributes work alone, they often become too much of a good thing. The individual burn the candle at both ends and thus burn himself out very quickly. Give an example of a person with an unaspected Mars that sort of went overboard with their Mars energy and then died very early in life because of stress, just overdoing things. So when the Mars is unaspected, because Mars is what we do, and if we're not being aware of it, then Mars can overdo itself. Obviously, it depends what sign of the zodiac is. It's less likely to happen if you've got Mars in a very slow sign like Cancer or Taurus. Jupiter. We now move away from very personal planets to the more general realm. Jupiter and Saturn stand between the personal and the transcendental planets, between self-motivating action in the abstract and impersonal sphere. However, Jupiter represents one factor in life which is important to personal growth, namely the ability to expand and use the higher mind in such directions as ideas and ideals, philosophy and religion. When Jupiter is unaspected, the person forms his own beliefs and mental images at an early age. He may seem unorthodox to his peers, even ultra, especially since he doesn't seem to care what others think. Jupiter is also the planet of belief. Now, I've seen that a number of times when people have Jupiter in the 12th, or if they've got it unaspected. Don't forget, it's a belief and self-belief as well. Jupiter in the 12th can make it more difficult for people to believe in themselves, that they have the ability to do something, because it's the lucky planet, and then you go and hide it in the 12th, makes it a bit more complex. But when it's unaspected as well, if you sort of imagine that's your planet of knowledge and it's not chatting with anything else in your chart, you might, again, you can either do the thing or do the thing badly. So if you have that, be aware of the sign it's in, the house it's in. Saturn, though not a personal planet, is very important in any horoscope. It represents the urge for security and safety. It gives a sense of responsibility, shapes our ambition and ego drive, is the teacher and taskmaster needed in order for us to not overstep our boundaries. When unaspected, Saturn can become too demanding of the individual. Nothing is ever good enough. We must constantly try harder, and even that will not suffice. So once again, planet of responsibility, and you could go either ways. You could be like complete responsible and don't want to have a thing out of line, or you could be totally irresponsible and have babies left, right and centre and shoot up drugs, etc. Now, she's got here Uranus, Neptune and Pluto. These three transcendental planets cannot be interpreted in the same vein as our previous delineations. Humans are mostly shaped by events and happenings in the earliest years. Childhood environment, parental attitudes, siblings, they're all determining factors that influence how we handle ourselves in later years. And they say that those three planets don't really start getting activated until much later in life, and I would disagree with that, especially if you're born with the Sun conjunct any one of them, or all of them, because you could have that if you were born during the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the 1990s, or you were born in the 1960s where Uranus and Pluto were conjunct. So yeah, so I wouldn't completely agree with that. However, if you have one of those three planets completely unaspected in your chart, watch out for transits to it, because that'll be the first time that you'll, inverted commas, feel the energy of that planet, and then it'll sort of suddenly start manifesting it. So that's when you need to watch out for the house that unaspected planet is in, and the aspect, so the transiting planet comes past that outer planet. And Uranus is about freedom. It's now in the sign of Gemini. Neptune's about our psychic self and our connection with the divine. It's now in the sign of Aries. And Pluto is about deep change and transformation. It's now in the sign of Aquarius. So that's where they are at the moment. And there are people that are going to be born with those planets in those signs, but they're already having a nice little conversation with each other, so it's not an issue. But also you have to remember that, what era you were born in, there's a lot of people that are politically leading countries at the minute, and they've got flipping Pluto in Leo, God help us all. And they're the ones that want the power and domination, and they want a nice photograph while they're doing it as well. So those are Marion and Joan's views on the unaspected planets. I'm going to be using the chart of a person and Nelson. You're not going to know where they were born or anything, but I did know this person reasonably well. So let's work through their charts. So we've got Virgo ascendant, Earth, Sun in Libra, Air, Moon in Scorpio, Water. The Sun is 15 degrees Libra, and it makes no aspects at all. There's two tiddly-widdly things, which I don't even know what those symbols stand for, but probably one of your sesquidrates or something. But a Moon makes no aspects either. So the Sun and the Moon, Sun 15 degrees Libra, Moon 20 degrees Scorpio. Then we get to Mercury, and Mercury only makes one aspect, because Mercury is 0 degrees Libra, and it makes a square to Neptune, and Neptune's 28 degrees Sagittarius, so that's an out of sign but within orb square. But mathematically, see, I would probably even ignore that, and I would be saying, in my professional opinion, that the Sun, Moon and Mercury are pretty much unaspected. Now, I am going to put the chart up on the show notes, so you'll be able to skip over there and have a look. But that's very much not aspected. Now, this particular person is actually an expert in beekeeping. So when I first knew them, I worked in a mystical shop, and they used to work in there as well, and then I read for them as well. So this is, oh goodness me, more than 20 years ago. And at that point in time, their job was to work in this mystical shop. And then a little further down the line, they moved away from Bath, and long story short, next thing I heard about them was on Facebook, actually. I discovered that they'd become an expert in beekeeping and were also lecturing at a local college about beekeeping and had become a member of a beekeeping organisation. And so just because those, definitely the Sun and the Moon aren't aspecting, and the Mercury's an outer sign but within orb aspect to Neptune, it doesn't matter. These things can still be achieved. Now also, when there's no aspects going on, so the Sun is located in the first house. When the Sun is in the first house, they want to go and do it. But the Virgo ascendant is going to make the person, and this is true of them, are quite worried. They were very, very good at worrying. We had lots of discussions about worry. And the Sun being in Libra, the indecisiveness was really a tricky thing for this particular person. And when I wrote the Libra book, they contributed towards it and gave an example of walking along the supermarket aisles and not being able to make up their minds what to purchase because they were weighing up whether or not they needed to take into account the sugar content or the packaging of it. And so they'd get to the supermarket and they'd be frozen on the aisles, like, oh, which one of these should I choose? Because they really found the weighing up in the typical Libra way. And I wonder now, looking back, if that's because the Sun was unaspected, so it got into that loop of the Libra thing, weighing things up, and then not being able to make a decision. And with the Moon being in Scorpio in the third house, so they were quite happy to talk about how they felt. They never had an issue ever with talking about how they felt, because the moon's in the third, so communicating, but not really comprehending how they felt. So there'd be sort of relationships that started and then suddenly stopped. And my first experience with this person was this relationship that they were in had ended. And for a Libra, that's the end of the world, because Libras so much want to be in relationships. Mercury, luckily, is in the same sign as the Sun sign. So it's telling us here that it's forming an aspect to Neptune, because Neptune's 26 degrees into Saggy. I mean, if it was 0 degrees into Capricorn, I'd say that definitely was a square, but I can see why it's forming a square. And they do have a good imagination to work with bees. Now, if you think about a bee is gonna sting you if you do the wrong thing, and they lecture in beekeeping, so they have to have a practical experience of that. You can't, beekeeping isn't something that you could just read about in a book and do. I know a number of people that know of a number of people with beekeeping, and I knew someone who kept some bees, and they'd bought the wrong. Their bees weren't happy. They'd bought the wrong variety of bee. They were ones that stung you incessantly. They weren't friendly ones. And this particular person had to get somebody else to take their bee colony away. So it's something very much needing to be hands-on. And since Mercury's the ruler to the chart and it's in the first, they're good at being able to talk about what it is that they do, but also the demonstrating side of it. There's so they've got fire, earth, air. They've got some earth planets, but the being able to actually do it is important. The real life experience. You can have the theories, but until the real thing has been done. And this was very much a thing for this particular person that they wanted to actually do. We had lots of lovely conversations. They were really, really good, charming person. You could have loads and loads of conversations with them. It was absolutely lush, and a really, really nice person as well. But until that practical stuff had been done, which you have to do with bees, you can't just watch a YouTube video and do it. So what the point I'm making is that Sun in Libra is so indecisive. When it managed to do the physical stuff of it all, air sign thing, and manages to physically do the thing, then that's the knowledge that was gained. And Sun's in the first house, so the Sun wants to do it. Do. So keep in mind where your unaspected planet is, the sign it's in, where else it's near to or not. And if you've got one in your chart, then ping me over an email and we'll discuss it at some other point. So today we've been talking about unaspected planets. The Astrological conference is coming up, so wing over there and look to see the speakers and the itinerary and what's going to be going on. So I'm actually going to be at the conference myself this year, and so I'll be recording the episode, because it's the end of this month. I will be recording the episode before I go, so it's not a totally live episode. And can I ask you a favour? If you haven't written a review for me, it would be lovely if you would. I've just noticed that my reviews on the Apple podcast, there's no recent reviews. There's lots of likes, so there's lots of people that have liked it, but the reviews, I think the last one was written in the early 2020s. So if you haven't written a review already, it really makes a difference, because it means that other people can listen to the podcast as well and be able to teach themselves astrology and learn an awful lot. And I hope that by sharing with you each week some episode, you're enjoying it in some way. So if you can leave a review on the Apple version of podcast, I can actually see that, and it sort of makes a bit more difference, because that's most of the listeners are on Apple, and then after that are all the other different providers. But if you can provide a review on there for me, that would be lush. So I hope you have a fab week, and I'll be back next week. Bye bye now.